Hello. So today I want to share my experiment so far, 7 months into the carnivore diet. So I am going to get into the good, the bad, some of the unexpected, mostly pleasant surprises that came along with my experience so far, and to just kind of talk more about where I'm at now, what I've seen improve, and where I'm wanting to go moving forward. So if you are just watching me, my name is Tiffany Brown. For the first time, this is kind of the beginning of my YouTube channel. I did one other video as a part one to this, which was my journey on the vegan diet, which I was vegan for 15 years, and then another 5 years I brought in eggs, but was still plant-based. And along the way, I developed a lot of health issues that got significantly worse as I kind of hit around the 40 mark, started having more perimenopause symptoms, gut dysbiosis, and all these things that I then began to address. One of the main things, one of the main changes being bringing animal products and meat back into my diet. So if you're wanting that whole story and all the ins and outs, definitely check that out. I'll be putting the link in the description of this video, so it's easy for you to find. But yeah, so this is just a part two. So I started just to kind of jump right in, I want to provide a list of symptoms that I was experiencing, and many of these just kind of shifting my diet to bringing in meat and lowering the carbohydrate, because long story short, I was dealing with candida as one of the things, and SIBO as well, and getting on a candida protocol with my diet was part of that. And so that involves significantly lowering carbohydrates, removing all starches and sugars, so pretty much just like non-starchy vegetables and proteins and fats. So I think that really significantly helped some of my symptoms, just cleaning up my diet. I was doing all whole foods for the most part, and that significantly helped some of these symptoms. And then I'll just be explaining what symptoms I was really wanting to focus on with carnivore in improving. So the list of symptoms that I had prior to really starting to address the SIBO, bringing meat in. I also started strength training in that time, became a health coach. So just got super inspired by my own journey, and I'm wanting to be sharing more of that with others and helping others. So one of the big things was I was under muscled, and I was, what they call skinny fat or TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. So I never had, I would say I was about 10 pounds up from my pre-baby weight after I had my daughter, about 18 months or 2 years after my daughter. I was still about 10 pounds over my pre-baby weight. But it was really, a lot of it was in my midsection. I always kind of tended to gain weight there. I was never like an overweight person, but I always kind of tended to gain weight in the middle. And I wasn't and still am not like a super curvy person. So there's that. But dizzy upon standing, getting lightheaded fairly often, panic attacks and anxiety. This was something that presented itself in my mid-30s, and it was debilitating. I get into that more in my last video. Irritability, especially before my cycle. I always, in my 20s into my 30s, had a fairly, uneventful cycle. Like I didn't have a ton of like mood swings. Periods were fairly like on time or whatever. So yeah, the irritability especially before my cycle, and the anxiety would get especially worse then. And then I was getting spotting before starting my period. So that was kind of a thing that changed, some of those early perimenopause kinds of symptoms, where I'd get brown spotting for a couple days before I would start my period. And then my period was a bit longer than they had been. I was also feeling just generally unwell. I have notes here. That's why I keep looking down. I'm just trying to keep myself on track. But I would, where did I leave off here? Yeah, I would feel unwell if I would go, after a few hours of not having eaten. And it wasn't like, hangry, or even like the dizziness or whatever wasn't the main. It was just like I would almost feel like I was coming down with something. One of my other symptoms was this like kind of scratchiness, and then almost like a lump feeling. I could feel it when I swallowed in my throat, which was really concerning. And in my research, because another symptom I had was like a burning right in my stomach area that wrapped around my rib cage, and I would especially feel it first thing in the morning. And there were other times during the day where it would feel like just a rock in my stomach. It was this like a sensation, or like a squeezing sensation in my stomach. So the throat stuff could have been like a silent reflux, because I never really felt like the traditional heartburn kind of feelings. And so I learned about silent reflux. And so I think that might have been what was going on with my throat. Also could have been my thyroid. Not totally sure. Didn't really get much testing done / any testing. So I'll just throw that out there. A lot of this stuff is like self-diagnosis and self-exploration. But what else am I missing here? So yeah, the feeling unwell was a really interesting, and just my energy would really plummet. And just bloating, bloating was something that I dealt with all through really my childhood and my years of being vegan. I was on a lot of antibiotics as a kid. So I think that that's been part of, what's been at play through my years. But yeah, bloating and gas. Rosacea. So this is something that, again, I brought up in my other video. It sprung up in my years of being vegan with around the same time as some other kind of autoimmune type conditions, being, food sensitivities too. So that was another thing. For years, I acknowledged wheat or gluten and dairy as sensitivities. But I very quickly, and part of what led me to carnivore, as I was kind of eliminating these things from my diet and beginning to heal, I started noticing patterns with some of the plant foods that I was eating that I thought were okay, and realizing, okay, I think I'm sensitive to more things than I ever realized. So, and even more unfolded as I started the carnivore diet and certain carnivore foods that I was also sensitive to, and realizing that I had histamine intolerance. So that's another layer that I actually didn't discover or realize until I started carnivore. So rosacea. So that, I've gone through these ebbs and flows of it being worse and better. And, it's been a journey even since being on carnivore. And for my early months of being on carnivore, and prior to that, my treatment was a 10% azelaic acid lotion. That was pretty effective, although when I did eat things, or there were certain things that were just more overwhelming to my system, it would, the azelaic acid only did so much. There would still be some rosacea flaring that would come through. And my rosacea isn't really, had some flushing, but mine was more just like the little pustule kind. So I would see those pop up, and I would actually feel itching and kind of nerve sensations on my face when I would eat something that I shouldn't, and I knew that it was going to stimulate and bring up these pustules after I ate it. So kind of interesting. As far as histamine goes, I started noticing with different foods, and just really like I couldn't quite identify which foods, which is what inspired me to do this, to really give carnivore a try, is just like itching around like the chest and the arms, feeling like, scratchiness in my throat. This ear especially would clog up. I experienced ear itching. Other things. I mean, I can't even, it's like as I'm talking about it, I'm feeling all these sensations. It's like my system automatically like responds, knows I'm talking about it. So yeah, chronic fatigue was debilitating. Before I started making any changes, it was like by 3 p.m. I mean, the whole day was kind of a struggle to get through, but like I was worthless after 3 p.m. I was finishing a massage. I'm a massage therapist, energy worker. I would come home after my shift around 3 o'clock and just sometimes I would nap. When I really first started trying to like heal and take care of myself, I was getting really into meditation and just acknowledging my need for rest and regulating my nervous system. And so I would just come home and like nap, and that was a struggle. Along with that came a lot of caffeine. So I'll get into sort of my journey with that caffeine and coffee dependence through this video. Night sweats, another fun one with the perimenopause, and sleep disruption, and joint and muscle pain. So this was another thing that was really just as debilitating as the chronic fatigue. And so it was just general like soreness in my joints, and muscle, and just like, and then feeling weakness. I started seeing some improvement with that as I started weightlifting. But when I got to carnivore, or just wanting to try, I was still experiencing some, so I had sciatica, debilitating sciatica for like 10 months back in like 2017. And I eventually found a chiropractor that helped me correct it. But that was like 10 months of active sciatica. And so it just left so much inflammation behind. And it was still like, even with weightlifting, I was like feeling more stability around it, strengthening the area, but I still would have this feeling of having to be careful of how I moved. Like, oh gosh, like watch yourself picking that up, that kind of a feeling, and just generally feeling stiff. So it would be like, if I sit in certain positions for too long, I would really feel it, or even doing just like spinal twists like this at the gym, I could like feel that pull and tension down there. And so I was really wanting to see what improvements I could get with that, and just still having like joint pain. Like when I would lift weights, I would feel like the strain like in my bone, my forearms and my elbows. So I wanted to see if I could have any improvement in that. I also had a sharp pain that I had through the whole summer. So it was like 3 solid months prior to starting carnivore, where it was just this sharp pain in my ankle that even if I was going to see my massage therapist and working it out myself, I couldn't get it better. And it was like, it would hurt to put weight on it sometimes. And then I was also dealing with pain and swelling in the ball of that foot. So that was another thing that I wanted to address. And I had attempted, by getting into fasting at some point in the summer. I was practicing, just some 24, I think I did a 72-hour fast, or a couple 72-hour fasts throughout the summer. And, hoping that like the stem, from what I was, hearing, that the stem cells could like potentially heal the area. Hadn't had any improvement with any of that. So, of course, you start stumbling upon content in the algorithm, and I started hearing more about carnivore. And so, yeah, with these symptoms, I was still dealing with the heartburn issue, that pain that wrapped around my rib cage, especially in the morning. I would still have random, just like digestive, like that pain in my stomach, that I would get. And so I was like thinking, do I need to do another, herbal protocol for the SIBO or Candida, whatever, and just didn't want to keep going around and around in that circle, right? So it was some of those digestive symptoms that I mentioned, and my rosacea. I also had like a dry patch of skin here on my the back of my scalp that I've had since I had my baby 7 years ago. So I wanted to try to clear that up. And, I've tried various things, different essential oils, coconut oil, like all these things to try to clear it up, different shampoos and things like that. And it's just like nothing has been helping to resolve it. So that joint and muscle pain, and then the chronic fatigue, like even though I had seen so many improvements, I was still becoming very reliant on caffeine. And I knew that this was just like superficial energy and that something wasn't right. So I really wanted that to shift, in addition to kind of just having this sense that I was really more insulin resistant than I realized. And in my attempts to fast, I was really kind of stuck in that sugar burner state, had a really hard time kind of switching over. So I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe this will like help me with my fasting. And I'll get to that as I've been experimenting with carnivore and fasting and all of that. So to kind of get into, 15 minutes in, and I'm just barely getting started, but this is 7 months of information. So, and it's just, I have a lot of symptoms, and then also just like, also now, realizing I'm dealing with histamine intolerance and, leaky gut, and just kind of what it really entails to heal all of this, especially when I've been dealing with it, I think really since like 2008 and probably earlier, when some of these symptoms started popping up. So, I'm trying to just be patient with my healing. But I will say, just even before I get started at any of this, that, if you watch my first video, like there's so many kind of cleanses and detoxes and ways with, plant foods that I tried to heal, and none of it worked. And I can honestly tell you that in the last 7 months, I feel better than I can really remember ever feeling. I started the vegan diet when I was 19. So I'm like, I guess I was feeling good when I was 19, I was pretty healthy at that point, healthy kid. So, yeah, but this is like significantly better than I can ever remember feeling. So I can definitely 100% say, if you're coming across this, because you're curious about the carnivore diet and wondering if it can work for you, and coming from somebody who spent decades being on the opposite end of the spectrum for a diet and trying to heal with food, that this has profoundly changed my life. And I would 100% recommend giving it a try, and a good try, because this is not a fad. This is not a quick fix. This is a process as your body is going through it, which I'm going to get into here. And so it takes time. And there's like, there are ups and there are downs, and it, gets kind of weird. And so just to start, as far as foods that I consumed, definitely evolved over the months as I was figuring it all out, and my patterns of eating, my timing, how many meals, all of that has changed so much throughout this process. So like I said at the very beginning, if I went more than a few hours without eating, I would feel really unwell. And when I started, I basically ate, everything under the, carnivore, for the most part, everything under the carnivore umbrella. I will say in the summer, or even earlier than that, I started dabbling in raw dairy because I was, just wanting to experiment to see if it was better than pasteurized dairy, and that I had had sensitivities to pasteurized dairy. And the raw dairy was better. And so I had been eating that, but I was still experiencing some symptoms, but I couldn't tell where things were coming from. And I didn't notice anything new coming up or being exacerbated by bringing in dairy. So the raw dairy. So I had been bringing that in. So when I started, I was doing, I wasn't doing raw milk so much. I really wanted to cut down on the carbohydrates. So I was just sticking to very small amounts of cheese, Parmesan, sharp cheddar, and some sour cream and cottage cheese. But this was all sides, like a little something to dip my steak in, or just like a sprinkle on top of eggs or whatever. So it was not much of a focus. It didn't play a big role. The heavy whipping cream I was putting in my coffee too, but it was just like a tablespoon per cup of coffee kind of a thing. Was not overdoing it. But I was doing that, lots of pork belly and bacon. And I basically, butter, eggs, beef, fatty meat. I was, got the fat trimmings from the butcher, and was really going for it with the fat. Chicken thighs a bit. I did do some chicken breast in the beginning because I was also buying it for my family, but I was drowning it in butter. So I was trying to make it up, really stay on top of the fat. And to be honest, I was constantly eating. And it was one of these things that turned on in me as my body was where's my energy? Not having the carbs come in, or I was just consuming all the things all the time. And I was probably, as I kind of estimated it, was probably eating about 3,500 calories a day. I'm not even kidding. And so it was 3 big meals plus snacking in between. I was eating some pork rinds. At some point I've been doing some sardines too. But as I started, I was jumping into carnivore and taking, removing all of the other plant foods that I had, I was starting to notice reaction to foods, or not really feeling all that well with certain foods. And at first it was I was just focused on getting fat adapted. So I wasn't quite sure what to think or how I was feeling. And I'll get more into just the specifics of my fat adaptation phase here in a minute. But once I was able to kind of get fat adapted, feel more energy, and I could kind of feel out what was what, the dairy came out. So it was really, I was noticing more too of histamine. So I'm still eating bacon here and there. I'm still eating some pork rinds here and there, but those aren't making me feel great. Chicken doesn't make me feel, in fact, there were some times where if I ate chicken, if my dinner was too close to bed and I had had chicken, that I would wake up with that burning feeling around my stomach. So, I try to do pasture raised, really focus on the highest quality if I'm going to eat anything, but anything outside of bacon or the pork belly, a little bit of pork belly that I was eating, probably it was eating a lot of pork belly when it comes to how much pork belly an average person should eat, but it was a small portion of in the grand scheme of all of my food for the day. But it wasn't making me feel great. And then there are a couple times that I tried eating a pork loin. it was like awful. Like I couldn't even finish it, not even because it tasted bad, but I was just like not feeling all that great. Just didn't really sit well. But so now I guess I'll just like fast forward. Now it's like I'm really focused on eggs. I eat a lot of eggs. I eat beef. I don't do slow cooked meats anymore. That was another thing that I was doing a lot in the beginning. I was really trying to just bring in all the fatty things and how convenient it is to like slow cook a chuck roast and, you know, be able to eat it for a couple days. And I was really feeling unwell after eating that. And so I started, you know, and then bone broth I wasn't really doing well with. So then it was like, oh, you know, this is all the evidence of like histamines being an issue. So, you know, I've had some cured meats here and there, or like deli meat, but you know, it's really just not the greatest for me at this point. So yeah, for me right now, it's like I will snack on a teeny bit of bacon for a treat. I'm not doing any dairy. I do butter. I'm doing butter in my coffee. I'm still doing coffee, but I will say now I'm like mostly decaf. I'll get more to that in a second. I don't want to get too, I have notes because I'm trying to stay on track, but I knew there's just like so much to tell since it's like I'm only doing this video after 7 months. So I'm going to try not to get too like off track on all the subjects at the same time. But what I will say about foods is that I started playing. So after I kind of got fat adapted, I started playing around with my macros more. So I started getting a little bit more energy. I didn't really feel like I needed, you know, I could go longer in between meals. And I'll say in my fat adaptation phase, I gained 7 pounds, which was fine. You know, I was really like, at that point, and that 7 pounds from when I started, which was like right after I had been doing like a 3-day fast. So to be fair, it probably was more like 5 pounds that I gained really, because I was probably like weighing slightly less than typical because I had come out of a fast. So I didn't notice with those 5 pounds though, that there was a huge change in like my body. Like it didn't really feel like it was all like body fat. So I think I was really putting on some tissue and like taking it like lean tissue and taking in so many more nutrients with what I was eating. So after about, so yeah, I mean, I guess I'll talk about the adaptation phase. So that was just more of a struggle for me than I realized it would be. I was really tired. I made the mistake, and I will say this, if you are somebody like me who is like realizing that you're really dependent on caffeine for energy and you're wanting to go like gung-ho and give up caffeine in the beginning, don't do that. Or like coffee because it's a plant or whatever, just don't. Because it's so much on the body and it can be really stressful, and going through the caffeine withdrawals and trying to get fat adapted is just a lot. So I would recommend holding off. So 2 weeks in, you know, I was low energy and, you know, just like consuming all the food. And I decided to cut out caffeine when I was a couple weeks in and cut it out for 2 weeks. And then I brought it back in. I felt like it was a must, because after 4 weeks, I still wasn't really fat adapted. And so I was like doing like the research about it, like what's really normal, because some of the people that, you know, we all listen to, or any, you know, I don't know if anybody watching is, you know, into like watching all the different doctors and influencers in this space on YouTube. But, you know, there's a lot of just conversation about it just being like a couple weeks, or, you know, and then it's like you can start making ketones in a few days. And And that was true because I was doing the pee strips, and I was starting to see them darker in the first, few 3-5 days, but was not utilizing them at all. So it was like I was peeing them out, right? Because we're using the pee strips. So it's like my body was making them. So it was like, what was interesting about that process was I noticed that once my energy started coming back a little bit, and then I started feeling more satisfied with less food and going more between meals and all of that, that I was seeing less color in the pee strips. So at first I was like, what's happening? Because I was just like learning. And then I realized, this is just evidence that my body's actually utilizing the ketones now. So that was kind of encouraging and cool to really see in real time that correlation. Because it was like my energy started getting better, and not like, I hear some people are like, I just had boundless energy. Like I heard an interview with some woman who was like, I just felt like I had more energy than my body could contain. Like I was like bursting at the seams. And I was like, what? Who are these people having these feelings? Because it wasn't me. And it was just a very gradual process of feeling less tired, but still pretty tired. So, for my birthday, I asked for a Keto Mojo to test my glucose and ketones. So that was when I started actually testing my blood. And I would highly recommend doing that if you're going to be embarking on this, to be getting that information. Because, as I kind of just did the fat adaptation, like just walked you through my fat adaptation experience. But what I was getting into before was my experience with playing around with macros, right? So I started getting a little bit more energy back and feeling better. And so I got excited to like try fasting again. And I did, and it was good. I mean, I did like a 3-day water fast in December. And then I was doing like weekly, I think I did like 3 or 4 weeks of doing just like 24-hour fast a week, which is essentially like 1 day a week of doing OMAD. And then like I dabbled. This all seems like a lot. Like I started fasting too much basically, because then it would be like, in January, I think I played around with like fast mimicking, and I kind of set up my own version of fast mimicking where it was like 5 days where I would eat 1 meal a day and kept the calories low, but still like a decent amount of protein. It was just sort of my own version. And again, I was testing ketones and I was just seeing how I felt, and like doing the fast mimicking for like 5 days definitely felt better than doing like a 72-hour water fast. So I'll say that. But then what happened was I had also started dialing back the fat a little bit. So I was like, maybe I need to do higher protein and more moderate fat. And I was leaning out a bit, and that was great. But again, I didn't have like a ton of weight to lose or anything like that, but I was just kind of more curious of like, what is this going to do? And what is this going to do? But, as soon as I was feeling like really fit, like looking at myself in the mirror, being like, cause I was still like strength training all this time too, which I'll get to in a moment and get more to like my body composition stuff. But, I was really kind of feeling this, starting to get to this place where I was like, wow, I'm really like seeing this difference in the mirror. And my anxiety started coming back. I started getting hangry. The food noise I had like forgotten about. So like in those initial months, my food noise, which I didn't always have a ton of, it's almost like I didn't even know what food noise was until it was gone and then came back again. And I was like, whoa, like all I can think about is the next time I'm going to get to eat. And I was consuming a lot more protein and lowering my fat. Irritability around my period, before my period, and feeling that hangry feeling. And those are things where I was like, these are non-negotiables. Like, this is when it comes to, so like if you're embarking on this and you're wanting, you have these health goals, like keep the health goals the standard and let any sort of fat loss be the byproduct of that. Like, don't sacrifice any of the healing you're doing to see a lower number on the scale or a little more definition in your abs in the mirror or whatever it might be, because it's just not worth it. And for me, I'm 43. I'm trying to, I will say, now where I'm at now, because I'll get to sort of how I've evolved. Like, I have no perimenopause symptoms because of what I then shifted after experiencing what I experienced. Having all of those kinds of symptoms come back was like, no, we're not doing this. And so I upped the fat again and I stopped fasting. So for the last couple months, I have been just, I don't want to say skyrocketing my fat, but I've really been upping the fat. I've been measuring weighing my butter when I'm putting it, and I am still doing coffee. But in the last couple months, since I've been upping the fat so much, I've seen this positive shift in my hormones, my estrogen, progesterone. What was interesting is over a couple of the months, and not necessarily, I'm not blaming this on, I'm not saying this is a bad thing and blaming it on lowering my fat. This is just more representative of like a hormonal evolution, where there were a couple months in there where before my period, my breasts got tender. And that was never something that I had ever experienced in the past, even when I was feeling my crappiest. So it was just kind of more like, oh, this is interesting. Like, I haven't really experienced this, but I think it was sort of my level, like things kind of leveling out. And so there were some symptoms of like more estrogen dominance that had come up that I hadn't ever had before. But after 2 cycles, that dissipated. But then I kind of went through this lower fat, higher protein phase with the fasting, and I was starting to experience like the premenstrual stuff, the irritability, hangriness, increased food noise, and all of that. So within the month of upping my fat, and it took some, but really within like the first couple days, I could feel I was like way more steady, like, because I was starting to get this like morning anxiety that I hadn't had in a while. So within the first few days of upping my fat, that had dissipated. My sleep was starting to get better. And then this period currently, well, I'm expected to get, according to my app, I'm getting my period in a few days. And I am so calm. I'm so chill, and I'm reading about progesterone and like how it's actually, that it's supposed to rise before we get our period. And that's the chill vibe that we should, so there is that feeling of like, okay, I want to be in my own space. I don't necessarily want to be out in a crowd. Like, I do, want to just kind of nurture myself. I'm feeling that, but I'm feeling really calm. Like, I'm not short with my, with my daughter. I have a 7-year-old daughter. And so oftentimes before my period, I would just have such like far less tolerance with her. And now it's just like, it's crazy how much patience I have, but knowing that I'm getting my period in just a couple days, way more even energy. And so this phase has been really interesting, upping my fat, and I've actually dialed down my protein. So right now I'm in this place where, so I don't know. Maybe I don't want to get too far ahead of myself with that. I'll get to that in a second with like the body recomposition stuff. And just kind of is going to lead me into like where I'm at now and where I'm going to be going in the future. So let me just kind of change gears a little bit. I know I kind of got into the hormones and my cycle, so I already sort of covered that. I want to add one more note to that. And so this gets very personal, but it's kind of crazy because it's something I forgot about um, as like a woman, a cycling woman. And I realized like, wow, it's been years since I've experienced this. But in the last 2 cycles, since, coming back to upping the fat, I have noticed more like discharge changes, like the fluctuations that we're supposed to have, like right the way it gets right around ovulation, the way it gets before the period, all of that, the way the consistency changes, all of that. I had lost that completely and like I forgot about it. And then in the last couple months, that's like totally come back, which is crazy. And I was like, so that's a pleasant surprise, where it's just like, I really know I'm seeing this evidence of better sex hormone balance, which is huge, huge and important. So thankful for that. I'll also make a quick mention of the hair situation. So I definitely was losing a lot of hair in the beginning, which is normal. And I kind of continued to lose. So that was a long process for me. And I think part of it could have been, because there's sort of a lag time of like when your body's under stress with fat adaptation, which is totally normal. And then when the hair loss kind of starts. So, it's delayed a bit. And then, I started playing around with the fasting thing again and going too high protein, too low fat, which I was clearly stressing my body out. So it was sort of like the hair loss just kind of continued. And I think a lot of that had to do with that. But I will just say in real time, in the last couple showers I've taken, I am not experiencing nearly as much coming out while I'm in the shower. So that is a new shift that I'm experiencing, and I'm seeing that correlated with really supporting myself with the fat, seeing these positive changes that it's had on my cycle and just moods and energy, stability. So, but to get to the joint and muscle pain, because this is really super interesting. I was dealing with a lot of that. And like I had mentioned, my ankle. So, really in like 6 weeks, I would say. So it was kind of like the fat at the end of that fat adaptation phase or whatever, that pain went away. And it wasn't like one day I had it and the next day it was gone. It was just like this, like, I'd go a few days without it and then it would kind of creep back in. It was like kind of gradual. And then at 8 weeks was my birthday. And I decided to go off carnivore for that meal. I had sought out a really great farm to table place. They didn't have seed oils in any of their stuff. And I was going to get steak and just kind of see what else that they had. The steak that they had came with sweet potato fries cooked in tallow, fried in tallow, and then my family ordered some Brussels sprouts as an appetizer. So basically in that meal, I had like 3 sweet potato fries, and it was like, I'm just gonna have a little taste, I don't need a bunch, and then I tried like 1 Brussels sprout or something. So didn't like do anything crazy, and the fries are cooked in tallow. And by the time I got home, it took about an hour after eating, but my ankle flared up so bad and the ball of my foot got so swollen, and it was way more swollen than it ever was when it was originally in pain. Like it got so really swollen, I couldn't even put weight on my foot when I walked. The ball of my foot had gotten so swollen and I could feel it. I could feel the inflammation in there when I was like rubbing on it. It was crazy, and it lasted for like a couple days and then it went away. So that was like my first experience of like, wow, this is real. Like as far as the anti-nutrients and the chemical compounds in in plant foods. So I do think that that was probably the oxalates in the sweet potatoes. I'm just gonna guess. But that was not fun. And I have since dabbled in some plant foods here and there, and that is not a symptom that has popped back up again since then. So I think that that's kind of fairly well, healed, or, we're over it at this point. But yeah, that was about 8 weeks in. So that was super interesting. But over time, I've noticed like I don't have any of the pain anymore here that I would really feel in my elbows when I'm doing like bicep curls. And then there have been times where like on Christmas, I like had a little bit of pie. And then the next morning I went to lift and I was feeling that feeling. And just general more like muscle soreness. I have, so the injury that I had in my low back, what's super awesome about that is I can now do, like when I do spinal twists, first of all, I don't even think about bending over to pick anything up anymore. It's just like, it's not like it's not a thing anymore. Like I do, like when I'm stretching, I occasionally like feel, like just like muscle tension or whatever. But when I do spinal twists specifically, like in that sacrum, the SI joint, it's called, I don't feel any of that pull or tension when I twist anymore, which is super encouraging that inflammation is really going down. There's maybe some more healing taking place in there, which is super exciting. And so to just kind of get into the fatigue and energy too, because this all really goes hand in hand. I have so much more energy. I can go to work and this got better even prior to Carnivore, but especially in the last 7 months. Like I just show up and I do my job and I leave with just as much energy as when I walked in there. I work out, I wake up at 4 a.m. I go to the gym before my daughter wakes up from school. A lot of days I bike to work, which is, to be fair, is like a 10-minute bike ride. So it's nothing like insane, but I'll bike to work. I get done with my shift. Obviously I bike home. Then I'm getting some, at some point in the afternoon, like after I film this, I'm going out for a walk and getting my whatever work I need done. And then I go pick up my daughter and I'll go jump on the trampoline with her. I honestly, like, and that's a powerful win for me because recently I've took her roller skating. I taught her she got roller skates for her 7th birthday. We went to the roller rink, which was so fun. And we literally skated for like 3 hours. And I woke up the next day with I felt a little tension in my low back, but that would have laid me up for days. I mean, it would have been unbearable. And I worked the next day. In fact, I did, because I worked massage at a place that I work at, and then I went and did 2 mobile massages after that. So I had done 7.5 hours of massage the day after I roller skated for 3 hours, which with a low back issue, you're like, with the way that you kind of skate and hunched over a little bit, I'm like holding her hand and she's kind of tugging on me. It's like, if any of you have ever had low back pain, roller skating's not where it's at for that. And I did, and then worked so long the next day. And then a few days later, my daughter and I were jumping on the trampoline and she wanted me to do like the drop on your butt and stand up thing. And my initial thought was like, no, like I can't, like I'm not taking my chances with the impact on my bottom. And I was like, why not? Like, let's just see what happens. And I did it and I was totally fine. And I kept doing it. And we were jumping on the trampoline and I kept doing it and I was totally fine. So that is like a massive win for me. To get into the fatigue thing now, I don't know if it's because of upping my fats. It could be because just the time, I've increasingly had more energy over the months, but in the last couple months, I've really started to feel like I could taper back on my caffeine. So it took a while, and so I I don't want to like urge, or encourage people to be consuming a ton of caffeine. But it supported me. It served a purpose. But I will say, something that really helped, because I was feeling kind of like crappy with regular coffee. I switched, so like that's part of the reason why I removed it, because I knew it was like the coffee itself, not just the caffeine, was not making me feel well. And I think it was really just the mold in the coffee. So I switched to a mold-free coffee, and that really was better, like less jittery, less just, I kind of just felt crappy, like ill, when I was drinking coffee. So when I switched to the mold free, that really helped. And then I started, the company that I buy from has a decaf. So, and they are really careful with like their process with the way that they decaffeinate them and everything. So I started with decaf, like just diluting the caffeine, like is lessening the caffeine. And so I've been tapering, but in the last couple months, I've been like feeling really good and like not needing to do any caffeine in the afternoon. And I've just been I'm really now actively every few days now, I'm doing like significantly more of the decaf and less of the caffeinated. So I'm down to like maybe 1 tablespoon, because I do it in a French press for the entire day, 1 tablespoon of caffeinated, and then the rest I'm doing decaf. And so my goal is to like get to fully decaf and then start actually like taking out the ritual and the habit of needing the coffee, and seeing then how I feel of like removing it completely. So I'll get to that and sort of leading into like what I want to be doing moving forward with my way of eating. But to touch on body recomposition a little bit. So like I said, I gained, let's call it 5 pounds. Technically it was like 7 pounds in the first 6 weeks. And then I just naturally felt like I could, I didn't need to eat as much. Didn't have the desire to eat as much, and began to shift my macros to lean out a little bit more. To back up a bit, in that fat adaptation phase, for any of you who are looking to do this and you are lifting weights, fully embrace and expect that your performance in the gym is going to suffer for a bit while you're getting fat adapted. It's just natural, it's chemistry, it's physiology, whatever you want to call it. So expect it, and it doesn't mean that you're actually losing any sort of muscle mass. So don't be concerned about that. After about 4 weeks, despite not having all of my energy back, like throughout the day, my performance, like it took about 4 weeks, and I started lifting the same amount that I had been lifting prior to starting Carnivore. So it took about 4 weeks. And again, it was like I was doing like a rep or 2 less per exercise, if that, like it wasn't like all of a sudden I couldn't do anything, so it was just like a slight lowering of like my reps or my weight or whatever for those first 4 weeks. And then I was right back. And I had been in a plateau in upping my weight for a few months. And prior to starting Carnivore, and then about, once I kind of got to my pre-Carnivore weight lift, in those first 4 weeks, then it was within that next month that I was upping my weight. So I do feel like there was some significance to that I had plateaued for so many months. And then it was like, after the fat adaptation phase, I was starting to build muscle pretty quickly, which was super encouraging. And so I just got a little too excited about, kind of trimming down, and just testing my body, just seeing how everything would feel. But really, ultimately, I want to feel my best. So I will say that I am in a really great place for weight right now. I think my top priority is, so when I started carnivore, I was in the low 120s and then went up to about 130. So I was like 123, went up to 130. Now I've kind of settled into this 124, 125. Right now I'm about to get my period, so I'm, 127 some days, which is totally fine. And what's interesting is I have more muscle definition in my abdomen, despite weighing kind of more than what I weighed when I started carnivore. I don't know how much of it has to do with losing visceral fat, because I do feel like, and obviously the bloat is gone too. But I now with my pants, I fit, and I still fit into all of my pants, but they fit differently. So I'm actually noticing more, like I said, I wasn't a curvy person. I've like gotten more, I have built, like I've been lifting this whole time too. So I feel like I've built more glutes and thighs for myself, and so my pants are fitting a little more snug there, and they're loose in the waist. Now, so when they were like fitting around the waist before, now they're a little like looser around the waist. So that's interesting how my body shape has shifted. And also my chest. So, I heard on a podcast at some time along the way about butter boobs, which I was like, still not totally clear on like what the definition is even of that. But I will say, after I had my daughter, so unfortunately I couldn't really breastfeed her. She was 6 weeks early and she never really fully took to breastfeeding. I would try to just kind of have the connection and like maybe help with my milk supply, which was not great. But then I was pumping. But my chest kind of like deflated after the breastfeeding. And it's like, ladies, if any of you know where it's like you can like pinch through them almost, where you're like, wow, it's so sad. And now it's like I notice there is some more fullness there. Now, I don't all of a sudden, I've always had a small chest. So I'm not going to say my chest has gotten bigger. But, being a 43-year-old woman who's had, if you listen to my other video, I've actually had 2 pregnancies. The first one was I was in my mid-20s. So, and despite that not being a successful, happy ending, my milk still came in, which was kind of a weird experience. So that's what I was dealing with after having my second baby. And I feel like they're fuller and they look, better than they did 7 months ago. 7 months. I also feel like, I never had a ton of loose skin around my abdomen per se, but I could tell in the ways, when I shift and move certain ways that there would be like some looser skin. I've noticed that's tightened up. So that's great. I mean, that kind of sums up my my body recomp a bit. And again, I just am in a place now where I don't want to sacrifice my healing and my hormonal balance. So if at some point in the future I can, lower my body fat slightly more, great. If not, I know I'm at a healthy weight now. I don't need to do that. But if it was just a matter of like dialing it in a little bit more, which I wouldn't mind being able to do if my body allows me to, but I am not willing to sacrifice the piece of balanced hormones that I now have. So it all is what it is, but I will keep you posted on that for sure in the future. Rosacea has been interesting because it has gotten better. So this is like long game, I think, with the rosacea thing. And I'm still, like I said, the histamine plays a part. So I do notice like there's been times where I've dabbled in trying to bring ferments in, because there's some people in this space doing that. And I do, I've done a lot of research on the microbiome. I have, feelings about it because I know that I've dealt with gut dysbiosis, and, there's so much. It's just like, I know the research is in its infancy, and like so much of it is just based on having plants. And I know that there's, Mary Reddick, if you are interested in like expanding, learning more about, ancestral diets and microbiome and all of that. She's doing a ton of really interesting research. And so, there's groups of people who are largely carnivore, like in tribes that may have less diverse microbiomes, but they're still vibrantly healthy. And then other tribes that incorporate more plant foods, and they do have a greater variety in their gut, but they're also healthy. So it's like, are we, just making this assumption based on correlation that more diversity equals better health? I don't know, but I don't want to ignore it altogether. So I'm like dabbling in things, and, so I'm trying to bring in the ferments, and my rosacea will kick up, or I'll have a tickle in my throat, or like my ear will plug up, so it's like I'm getting these histamine reactions. And so I think, the rosacea is definitely histamine related too. And I think it's like with certain bacons, I notice it more than others, or if I'm eating too much bacon, maybe it'll flare a little bit. And so, my next phase, so I think that that's kind of sums up most of like my symptoms and where I'm at with them. Actually, this patch on the back, I am noticing this getting better. This is not like a resolving overnight thing either, but I am noticing progress with this as well. So I'm happy with that. I am wanting to, super pumped about my vibrancy, my energy, my lack of pain. The other thing with my pain that I noticed the other day, so I want to get into some of like more of my pleasant surprises that are like unrelated to the big things that I was kind of like, oh, this is wonderful. One thing that I noticed, and this is related to my pain, but like for forever, since all my years of being vegan, this is like one of the signs of less than superior health. When I would like rest on a joint, so like resting on my elbow, like laying on my side or whatever, if I would move or like relieve the pressure of resting on the joint, it would be super stiff and painful. And I don't get that anymore. Like I had one of those moments where I was like propped up laying on my side, and I moved, and I had been there for a while. And I got up and I was like, oh my gosh, that doesn't even hurt anymore. So that's just like a next level kind of observation of just how much my inflammation's gone down. No body odor. Like, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, I didn't like put any deodorant on this morning. This is totally going to be super gross, but I don't even care because I wanted to do an experiment. And I had showered in the morning, the other morning, didn't put on deodorant, went the whole day with no deodorant. The next morning, I woke up, went to the gym with no deodorant. And then it was kind of a crazy morning. And to be honest, like before I went to go do massage, I didn't even rinse off. I just went. And again, I didn't put deodorant on. That was sort of an accident. Like it was just like, oh, I ran out of time and like whatever. And I worked my work shift, and I got home, went for a sweaty walk, and then came home, and I like smelled and then I kind of thought, I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't worn deodorant for the last 48 hours. I've essentially done 2 workouts. I think I even rode my bike, like all of this stuff, and I had 0 body odor. So I'm saying it's a thing. In case you were wondering, no gum bleeding. So again, full transparency, gonna be gross here. I used to frequently get bleeding gums, even if I was, if I was like in and out of the habit of flossing, right? Like who isn't? But even if I was like fairly regular about flossing, I would still get bleeding gums. And now none. And still being somewhat infrequent with my flossing, I can go days without flossing and then go back to flossing and not have any bleeding gums. I've also noticed buildup, like, you know how we all get it, like the buildup on the back of the bottom teeth. It's like coming off. Like I feel it like after I floss, like I'll floss and then like a piece of it will come off. So that's kind of crazy. And totally gross, but thanks for hanging with me. Some other fun things. So I get massages every month, and my massage therapist the time before last was like, you're literally aging backwards in your face. Like I can see like your fine lines around your eyes like lessening, which is super cool. And then this last time he was like, your arm, and he's like, and he was saying that even between just within that month, because I try to see him like once a month. He was like, your arms feel different. Like, what are you doing? And I found that really interesting because I've been upping my fat. And he was like, they feel like the muscles in your arms feel so much more dense to me, which I found really interesting. And that's just been, and I haven't really upped my weight in the last month in the gym either. So I don't quite know what that's all about, but I am wondering if just an over time or if it just happened this last month or what, that there's like less marbling, like, talk about like quality of muscle and there being like fat in the muscle tissue and that could be lessening. And so like my muscles are like feeling denser, even though I haven't necessarily upped my weight. Just a theory, but I'm saying, somebody who works on my body every month is like really seeing some profound shifts since I've started this way of eating. Let's see. Oh yeah, skin related stuff. My skin is so much less dry. So since forever, and to be fair, I spent, a couple decades in Denver, which is very dry. But even since moving, I was in Nashville and now I'm in Austin, so more humid climates. I get out of the shower and it's like a mad race to get my skincare on, whether it be on my body or on my face, because it's like as soon as my skin dries from the water, it's like super tight and needing moisture. And then in the winter time too, my legs, especially because they're like covered all the time, get super dry. And this past winter, did not deal with any dryness on my legs at all. And I don't have that feeling of needing to immediately put on moisturizer after I get out of the shower. I can like walk around a bit or do whatever I'm doing, and not be like in this mad race to get my products on, which is super great. And I also have had a few different scars from like ingrown hairs in the past on my legs. I have one on my leg and I have one that's actually, and this might just have been like some kind of a cut where the scab kind of broke open a few times to where there's like a raised scar. So basically it's like two like raised scars on my leg that used to get kind of dried out and were more raised. So this one on the back here is no longer raised anymore. I can't even feel it. And then the one on my leg is flattening and it doesn't get dry, which I, kind of mentioned that my skin doesn't really get as dry anymore. So that's also cool. So I'm going to keep an eye on those things. And yeah, I think that about sums it up. But yeah, so moving forward, yeah, I'm definitely continuing a carnivore way of eating. I love this way of eating. It's every meal is delicious. I'm keeping it super simple. I kind of go through phases of like what I'm eating in my meals. I've been on a huge New York strip kick. And with upping my fat, I get fat trimmings. So I've like been doing New York strips, and then I'm kind of using my fat trimmings as like a fat dial where I decide where I'm going to add it. I've been dabbling a bit sort of in fat fasting. So having like windows, like, more of like a 6 to 8 hour window of eating like 2 meals. And so then in the morning, I'm focused on just getting fat in. So I'm doing fat trimmings and butter and things like that, and then doing kind of a midday and then evening meal. I only do it that way because I want to be able to eat dinner with my daughter. I would love to be able to just eat in the morning, eat mid-afternoon, and be done, but I do not want my example of eating and showing that I do eat and sharing that with her is super important to me. So I eat dinner, and I often eat it later than I'd like to. But it's just the way our schedule works, and I'm doing the best that I can with that. So anyway, so like the first, hours of the day, I'm really doing mostly just fat. And then I dive into my two big meals with protein. I've been in a place now where I'm kind of looking at like what's the least amount of protein I can consume while still getting the results that I want. So because I'm wanting to up, so I've been measuring ketones. This is another thing that I didn't say. I know this is getting long, and I hope you find it interesting. If any of you are still here, thank you. I should have broken this up into like 5 videos or something, but I'm just getting it all out on here. But when I was starting to test ketones, and this was kind of around the time where I was too high protein, and lowering my fats a little, I was like never in ketosis. I'd be like 0.2, 0.3. And then I started the fasting. And so then I was starting to see my ketones, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm making ketones. And I was also just gauging the way that I felt and the ketone reading, and noticing that I really, because I was kind of reading somewhere that like, oh, even if you read your ketones are reading lower, it could just be because you're actually utilizing them and there's not much circulating in your blood at that moment or whatever. And I do have a lot of activity, right? So I'm lifting heavy 3 days a week. I'm walking every day at least 10,000 steps. I besides health coaching, I'm also doing massage. So I'm moving a lot. But I noticed that when it was like at 0.5 ketones, where they say like that's when you're officially like you're really in ketosis. If I wasn't at 0.5, I could tell. And it was almost to the point where it's like before I would measure my ketones, I would gauge the way that I was feeling, and I would guess like what the ketones I would find when I tested. And I was pretty accurate, and being able to tell when I was in ketosis and when I wasn't, and when I felt shitty and when I felt better. And I definitely noticed that I felt better when I was in ketosis at least 0.5 or higher. And so it's important to measure. If you're not feeling great, because I was eating plenty of fat. Like it's not like I wasn't eating, but I was probably eating 150, 160 grams of protein, and I'm about 125 pounds. So I was definitely doing that higher protein thing. And then I was eating I was eating fatty meat, and I was eating the 80-20, but like I wasn't necessarily eating the rendered fat, so, and then I was eating less of like the pork belly and stuff like that too. But when I started upping the fat and I could see it in my ketones, because I was just like, how am I not getting into ketosis? Like I'm carnivore, like I'm eating no carbohydrates. How am I not getting into ketosis? And, but if your protein is too high and your fat's too low, you won't be in ketosis. So measuring is super helpful, because then once I really kind of figured that out and upped my fat, I felt so much better. But what came with that too was lowering my protein. So when I was doing 150, 160 some days of protein, I am now trying to like just do as close to 100. But honestly, like once you've been doing higher protein, like it's hard to stay at 100 grams and be upping the fat. So I'm trying to just play around with that now and really dialing in my fat to protein ratio, and then, still be getting in the gym 3 days a week and see, because, if you're making good ketones, it can be muscle sparing. So I want to see if I can be building muscle with 100 grams of protein, which for me puts me more at that 0.8 per pound of ideal body weight range. So it's still like a good range for building muscle. So that's my current test. I'm also going to be, like I said, I've dabbled in ferments and all of these things. I really want to be like trying to like play around a little bit with building the microbiome, but like my body's not ready for it. I'm still reacting, like I said, the histamine thing. So my next experiment, in addition to doing 80-20, is to be removing butter, because even though I'm not super reactive, it could be enough accumulated with everything else to be like pushing me over an edge here and there. And I have noticed since I've upped my fat, I'm like, is this because I'm in deeper ketosis, or is it because I'm upping my butter? But my rosacea has been acting up more. So I'm like, maybe it's because it's not like a deeper ketosis thing, but it's, I'm doing more butter and it's pushing me over like my histamine load. So I also know that there's got to be some addictive quality to it, because I'm having such a hard time like making the commitment to give up butter. So I'm like, I'm probably slightly addicted to it. But my goal is, so I'm tapering my caffeine. So in the next week or so, I'm giving myself a little grace because it is a few days before my period and I'm just being gentle with myself. So I am tapering my caffeine and eating the rest of my butter. And then I plan on not doing full lion, but because I think egg yolks are okay for me, but I am going to try to give up egg whites. So my plan is to do fat trimmings, egg yolks, which will now be my pre-workout, because I was just kind of doing butter coffee. And I do like to have a little something. I don't like to be completely fasted before I go to the gym. So I'm just going to pivot to doing some egg yolks in tallow for my pre-workout, and then sticking to beef in the form of steaks, 80-20 beef, ground beef, and egg yolks and fat trimmings, if I haven't said that. And do that and cut out the coffee completely, even the decaf. So that is my next plan, to just see for 30 days, see what it does for me with my histamine, because I get a little clogged up in this ear randomly. I'm still dealing with the rosacea being up and down, although I have removed the azelaic acid, so I'm no longer using that, and my skin is a lot clearer more of the time. So I've seen improvements, but I'm just wanting to test the waters on that and then keep going and seeing if I can be still building muscle with just more like around 100 grams of protein. So I'll definitely be doing a follow-up video on that. I'll also mention that I was doing, just so I'm being fair and fully transparent, for a good portion of the time, I was doing protein powder, a chocolate flavored beef isolate protein powder in my coffee. And that was something around when I was doing my fat, like really trying to up my fat a couple months ago and lowering the protein a bit. I decided to be done with the protein powder, and I didn't really feel like I needed the crutch anymore, and I'm wanting to get away from the coffee. So that was just sort of like a thing keeping me hooked on like having coffee. So I think that actually greatly improved my ability to get into ketosis too, not like having that slow drip of like amino acids in my coffee throughout the day. So I think that helped to finally cut that out. But yeah, so I am going to cut it back a little further for 30 days, see how that feels. And I plan on testing the waters periodically and bringing in ferments. So even if it's from what I've learned, again, Mary Ruddick is a really great resource for that. If you're wanting to like be building your microbiome at all, But there's some suggestions that I've heard from her of like just bringing these things in very, very small amounts and trying to introduce them slowly as just this micro dosing of like feeding the microbiome and then bringing in the ferments. So that'll be a future experiment, but my body's not loving that idea right now. So that's that. Yeah, I would love for you to just like this video, subscribe if you want to follow along. I am a health coach as well, so I'm wanting to be putting on more educational content on here. It's all based on ancestral nutrition, movement, and lifestyle. So this is a great place to hang out. I'm also going to be doing nervous system regulating techniques like tapping videos, EFT, and guided meditations. So I want this to just be a nice, calm, safe space where women can come to balance their hormones, heal their metabolism, and regulate their nervous system so we can thrive, because we can. So if you are a woman right now and maybe you have a nice fun list of perimenopause symptoms, other health issues, autoimmune conditions, whatever it is, like, we don't have to live this way. We can heal, we can thrive. Pain is not normal, fatigue is not normal, and there's ways that you can heal. So I'm just happy to be another person in the space to share my story. So comment below anything you want to share that you got out of my experience that I shared with you today, any questions you might have. If there's any, I could have very well left a vital part of my experience out at this point. So if you have any questions about anything, and like I said, I'm an open book, so it can't get too weird. But yeah, that's it. So yeah, until the next video, we'll talk soon.